This one line on the seed packet decides how many tomatoes you're going to get, and most gardeners completely misunderstand it. Most tomato failures don't happen in summer or even in spring. They happen right now before the season even starts. If you've ever had huge tomato plants with no fruit, tomatoes that never fully ripened, or vines that looked amazing and then just stopped producing, this is probably why. And the worst part, most gardeners think they're doing everything right. Most gardeners choose tomato varieties based on the name, the picture on the packet, or what worked for someone else, not based on how tomatoes actually behave in their growing season. They grab a beefsteak because it looks impressive. They pick an indeterminate because they heard it produces more. They see 90 days and assume that fits their calendar. And by the time most gardeners realize they've picked the wrong tomato, it's already too late. Let's clear something up that causes a lot of confusion. When a seed packet says days to maturity, those days do not start when you plant the seed. They start after you transplant the plant into the ground, and they assume near perfect growing conditions. I know, that's how I felt when I found out. Most tomato seedlings are transplanted when they're about 6 to 8 weeks old. So if a tomato says 80 days to maturity, you're really looking at roughly 125 to 140 days from seed to first harvest. That alone causes a lot of gardeners to misjudge their season. And that's before weather slows anything down. Cold springs delay growth, cool nights slow development, and heat stress pauses flowering. Those perfect conditions almost never happen in real gardens. So for most gardeners, the real timeline is actually longer than what the packet says, not shorter. Now, this is exactly why we built our free garden guide. Instead of guessing, you tell it what you want to grow and where you live, and it gives you planting dates that actually make sense for your area, including when to start seeds and when to transplant. It takes the guesswork out of the step. This is where real productive growing time matters. Real productive growing time is not your last frost date to your first frost date. It's the window between those two where tomatoes can actually grow, flower, set fruit, and ripen. And that window is usually shorter, again, than most people think. Now, a lot of focus this time of year is based on your last frost date, so kind of the end of winter, beginning of spring. But let's talk about the other side of the season. How long you really have before things shut down. Most gardeners look at their first frost date, but tomatoes don't stop producing at frost. They completely die at frost. They slow down long before that. Cool nights reduce fruit set, shorter days slow ripening, and growth definitely tapers off a few weeks before an actual freeze. So your real end date isn't the frost, it's when conditions stop supporting production. Now, a good rule of thumb is to count back 2 to 4 weeks before your average first frost date. That earlier date is usually when tomato production effectively ends in cooler climates. In hot climates, shutdown often happens much earlier, when nighttime temperatures stay above 70 degrees, and especially above 75. Fruit set slows down or stops entirely, and that's your real end point. So here's how to turn frost dates into real productive growing time. Start with your last spring frost date, but don't use that date directly. Tomatoes usually need a couple of weeks after last frost before soil temperatures and nighttime temperatures support real growth. So your real start date is often 1 to 2 weeks after your last frost. So write that down. Now take your first fall frost date, and instead of using the frost date itself, count back 2 to 4 weeks. That earlier date is when tomato production usually slows down or stops. Now, the days between those two adjusted dates, your delayed spring start and your early fall shutdown, that is your real productive growing time. So once you know your real start date and your real end date and count the days between them, that number is your productive growing time. That's the number that you compare to the days to maturity on your seed packet. So Just have that information when you're choosing varieties to grow this year. Now, if you want the step-by-step breakdown and examples, I've got the blog post with a downloadable worksheet linked below. Now, before we go any further, we need to clear up one thing that causes a lot of confusion. Determinate and indeterminate tomatoes are not just about size. They're about how and when the plant produces. Determinate tomatoes grow to a set size, set most of their fruit in a short window, and then focus on ripening what they've already made. They're built to finish. That makes them a good fit for shorter seasons or for gardeners who need tomatoes to produce on a tighter timeline. Indeterminate tomatoes, on the other hand, they grow continuously. They keep growing, flowering, and producing for as long as conditions allow. They assume the season will last, and that works beautifully in long, mild seasons, but it can be a problem if your productive window is limited. There's one more layer that matters just as much as timing. Not all tomatoes handle temperature the same way. Some varieties are built to tolerate cooler nights and slower springs, and others are built to keep producing when summer heat would shut most tomatoes down. If you ignore that part, even perfect timing can still be a disappointment. In cooler climates, tomatoes need to be able to set fruit in lower temperatures. So varieties like Stupus, Glacier, and Siberian are known for producing reliably when nights stay cool and summers are mild. You can kind of tell by how the names sound. They tend to mature earlier and they don't need intense heat to keep moving. That's why gardeners in cooler regions often struggle with big late season tomatoes and do much better with varieties that are built to finish sooner. On the other hand, in hotter climates, the challenge flips. Many tomatoes stop producing, they stop setting fruit once nighttime temperatures stay too warm, even though the plants still look healthy. Heat-tolerant varieties like Heatmaster, Solar Flare, and Phoenix, again with the names, they're bred to keep flowering and setting fruit when temperatures climb. They don't panic in the heat. They're built to keep working when other tomatoes shut down. So this all ties directly back to real productive growing time. In cooler climates, production is limited by cold. In hotter climates, it's often limited by heat. Either way, choosing varieties that match how your season stresses tomatoes is just as important as knowing when your season ends. Now let's put all this together with a real life example. Let's say your real productive growing time is 90 days, June 15th to September 15th. From that 90 days, you don't get to use it all, unfortunately. Your plants need time to establish after transplanting. Weather will slow things down. You're rarely going to have perfect conditions, so that 90 days might function more like 75 or 80 usable days. Now look at a tomato that says 85 days to maturity. That tomato already needs more time than you realistically have. It might grow beautifully, it might flower late, but it's very likely to run out of season before it pays you back with a harvest. This is why variety choice matters so much. If your usable window is around 75 days, you're better off choosing tomatoes that mature in 60 to 70 days. That margin is what protects you from weather stress and slowdowns. This is what I kind of call choosing tomatoes backwards. You start with a usable time, you subtract seedling time, you account for real-world delays, then you choose varieties that can finish comfortably, not barely, inside that window. When you do this, tomatoes stop feeling unpredictable. They ripen when you expect them to, they produce before stress shuts them down, and they stop being the hardest crop in your garden. If tomatoes have frustrated you, it's probably not your soil, probably not your fertilizer or your effort. You didn't grow tomatoes wrong, you just picked the wrong ones for your season. Get this right before the season starts, and tomatoes become one of the most reliable crops in your garden. I'll link the full written guide below with the downloadable worksheet if you want to walk through the timing step by step. And for more information on what varieties will do best where you live, click this video right here, and I'll see you next time.